The first day disaster. Emma Carter didn't have time to panic. It was her first day at Sterling Enterprises, one of the biggest firms in the city, and fate was already playing tricks on her. She woke up at 5:30 a.m. sharp, even though she hadn't slept much the night before. Her nerves had kept her awake, tossing and turning, replaying the thought in her head. Don't mess this up. Don't mess this up. Emma had worked hard to get here. She came from a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. College wasn't easy. Emma had juggled waitressing, tutoring, and late-night studying. She'd always dreamed of breaking into the corporate world, not for luxury, but for stability, security, and a chance to prove she was more than what people thought. Now she was in the glass tower of Sterling Enterprises, clutching her brand new badge with trembling hands. The lobby smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume. Executives in sharp suits strode past, their phones glued to their ears, their voices brisk, urgent. Breathe, Emma, she told herself. You belong here. Her desk was on the 21st floor, just outside the office of Mr. Clarkson, the chief operations officer. She was hired as his executive assistant, but Emma knew the role came with high stakes. Clarkson was known for his temper. Emma Carter? A sharp voice called. She turned to see a tall woman with icy blonde hair, tailored gray suit, and a clipboard. Her eyes scanned Emma from head to toe, pausing at the modest navy blue skirt and blouse Emma had chosen. Yes, that's me, Emma said, forcing a smile. Margaret Steele, senior assistant, the woman replied. Her tone was flat, dismissive. You're late. Emma glanced at her watch. 8:57. She was early, but she swallowed her protest and simply nodded. Follow me. Don't lag behind. Mr. Clarkson hates delays. Emma trailed her, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Every desk they passed seemed to hold someone who already looked more experienced, more confident, more important. She reached her workstation, a sleek desk with 2 monitors, a phone, and a mountain of files already waiting. You'll be tested today, Margaret said, handing her a stack of forms. Just stay out of the way and don't embarrass yourself. Emma nodded again, though her cheeks burned. She had learned long ago not to argue. Prove yourself through actions, not words. She barely had time to sit when the storm began. The digital apocalypse. At 9:15, chaos erupted. The lights flickered. Both monitors on Emma's desk went black. Across the floor, shouts rose. The system's down, someone cried. Emma looked around in shock. Phones stopped working, printers froze mid-page, and files vanished from open screens. Panic spread like wildfire. Where's IT? A manager barked. Get them up here now. Emma tapped the phone at her desk. Deadline. She tried again. Nothing. Her stomach twisted. This cannot be happening on my first day. Her boss, Mr. Clarkson, stormed out of his office. His face was red, his voice booming. What is going on? He demanded. No one answered. People rushed around, bumping into each other, frantically checking cables as if that would solve anything. Emma forced herself to pick up the phone again. She dialed the IT department. Busy. She dialed again. Still busy. Wonderful, she muttered, slamming the phone down. We're stuck in a digital apocalypse. She rubbed her temples. She could already imagine Clarkson yelling at her. And right on cue, Miss Carter, Clarkson barked, pointing at her. You, call it and get someone up here now. Do not just sit there like a statue. Her face flushed crimson. Yes, sir. She tried again. Still nothing. That was when she saw him, the stranger in the suit. A tall man entered the floor, calm amidst the storm. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark charcoal with a subtle sheen. His shoes were polished enough to see your reflection. His expression was serious but unbothered, as though this chaos was nothing more than background noise. He crossed the room with slow, confident strides, his arms folded as he observed the panic around him. Emma, desperate and frazzled, mistook him immediately. Finally, an IT guy. She jumped to her feet and hurried over. You, yes you, she said sharply, her voice trembling more from nerves than anger. The whole system's down. Nothing works. People are panicking. Do something. The man raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. His eyes were striking, deep blue, calm, almost amused. "I see that," he said, his voice low and steady. "Well, don't just stand there," Emma blurted. "You're it, aren't you? Fix it, please." The corner of his mouth twitched as if he were holding back a smile. Without a word, he walked past her to a nearby computer. His hands moved with surprising ease across the keyboard, entering commands Emma didn't understand. Within seconds, the frozen screen flickered back to life. Gasps filled the air. "Wait, it's working," someone said. Another computer buzzed back to life, then another. Within minutes, the entire floor was humming again. Relief spread like oxygen. Emma stared in disbelief. "How did you—" But before she could finish, he had already stepped away. He brushed invisible dust from his sleeve and looked around as though the problem had been nothing more than a puzzle to solve. Employees whispered, "Who is that guy? I've never seen him before." He fixed everything in less than 5 minutes. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to thank him, but when she turned back, he was gone. Just vanished into the sea of glass offices and endless hallways, the whisper of suspicion. Clarkson came storming out again, his face flushed, but now more from relief. "Good work, Miss Carter," he barked. Emma blinked. Good work? She hadn't done anything. She opened her mouth to explain, but then closed it. If Clarkson thought she had been responsible for summoning the mysterious fixer, maybe that would buy her a little grace. But curiosity gnawed at her. Who was that man? He hadn't looked like IT. His suit alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. His calmness wasn't that of an employee rushing to save their job. It was the kind of composure she had only ever seen in people with nothing to prove. By noon, the system was running smoothly again, but Emma couldn't shake the image of his eyes. Calm, knowing, almost as if he had expected this chaos. She had no idea that her mistake, that moment of yelling at him, would change her entire life. Because the man she had mistaken for a T wasn't just anybody. He was Alexander Sterling, owner of the company. And soon, her life was going to be tangled with his in ways she could never imagine. The rumors begin. The rest of Emma Carter's first day at Sterling Enterprises felt like walking through a fog. Even though the crisis had been resolved and the office was humming again with productivity, she could not shake the image of that man, calm, confident, with eyes that had seemed to see right through the chaos and into her panic. She replayed their brief exchange over and over, cringing each time she remembered the way she had barked at him to fix it. It wasn't her nature to snap at strangers, but the pressure of the moment, the sharp orders from Clarkson, and the terror of messing up her first day had made her desperate. Still, her conscience burned with embarrassment. Whoever he was, she had treated him like a subordinate when everything about him, the way he carried himself, the way people instinct. Tavely paused around him, hinted that he was anything but ordinary IT staff. By mid-afternoon, whispers had already spread across the 21st floor like wildfire. Office gossip at Sterling was sharper and faster than any official memo. Emma overheard snatches of conversation at the break room when she poured herself a much-needed cup of coffee. "Did you see him? That was Alexander Sterling himself." "No, it couldn't be. The CEO? Why would he come down here and fix computers?" "I swear it was him. I've seen his picture in Forbes. Same jawline, same eyes." Emma nearly dropped the cup as her stomach lurched. Alexander Sterling? The Alexander Sterling? She had read about him before she even applied for the position. The man who had inherited his father's company at only 27, who had turned a struggling investment firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire with holdings in technology, logistics, and real estate. He was the subject of business case studies, the kind of man people quoted in boardrooms as an example of modern leadership. He was rumored to be ruthless with competitors, yet oddly quiet in public life. And she, Emma Carter, the rookie assistant, had scolded him like a misbehaving intern. She left the break room quickly, cheeks burning, and returned to her desk, trying to bury herself in spreadsheets. But the more she typed, the more her mind wandered. If it truly had been him, why had he been wandering the floor with no entourage, no announcement, no visible sign of authority except his own presence? Why had he personally fixed a technical meltdown instead of sending one of the countless professionals on his payroll? And most of all, why had he disappeared without a word, leaving her with the uncomfortable knowledge that she had made a fool of herself in front of the most powerful man in the company? The rest of the day dragged on, her thoughts scattered, her concentration weak. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, she was exhausted. Ted, but too restless to relax. She had barely stepped into the elevator when Margaret Steele's cool voice sliced through the air behind her. "Don't look so relieved, Carter. You survived one day. Tomorrow may eat you alive." Emma forced a polite smile, though the words stung. Margaret clearly saw her as competition, or perhaps simply as another assistant to measure herself against. Either way, Emma had no energy left to spar with her. She rode the elevator down, stepped into the crowded lobby, and let out a long sigh of relief when the cool evening air hit her outside the building. She promised herself she wouldn't obsess about what had happened. It was over. She would just show up tomorrow, work hard, and prove she belonged here. But fate was not going to let her move on so easily. The next morning, Emma arrived extra early, determined to make a better impression. The office was quiet, the lights still dim, and the air filled with the scent of freshly polished floors. She settled at her desk, opened her notebook, and began organizing the tasks Mr. Clarkson would expect her to handle. For a while, the silence gave her peace, but peace in a place like Sterling Enterprises never lasted long. By 9 o'clock, the floor was buzzing again. Phones rang, emails flooded in, and Emma found herself juggling calls, notes, and Clarkson's impatient demands. Then came the soft murmur of whispers again, drifting from one cubicle to another like a secret too delicious to keep. She caught fragments. She yelled at him. Didn't even know who he was. Must be embarrassed. Emma's chest tightened. They were talking about her. She could feel it in the way their eyes flicked toward her desk and then quickly away. The gossip from yesterday had fermented overnight and turned into something sharper. She clenched her pen, trying to focus, but her ears betrayed her, pulling in ever a snippet of conversation. She thought he was IT. Can you believe that? I heard she practically ordered him around. She won't last a week if he decides he doesn't like her. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. She wanted to sink into her chair, disappear into the desk drawer, anything to escape the feeling of being scrutinized. Then, as if conjured by the whispers themselves, he appeared. Alexander Sterling. There was no mistaking him this time. He walked into the office with a presence that silenced even the boldest gossipers. The air shifted as though everyone had inhaled at once. His suit today was navy, crisp and tailored with effortless precision. His tie was subtle, his cufflinks understated but expensive. He wasn't the kind of man who flaunted wealth. His confidence was wealth enough. Emma froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. She wanted to hide under her desk. Maybe he wouldn't notice her, maybe he wouldn't remember, but fate once again had other plans. He walked straight toward her desk. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth, calm, but carrying the weight of authority that made even Clarkson, who had hurried out of his office to greet him, pause in silence. Emma scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her notebook. Yes, Mr. Sterling?" His eyes studied her, and she felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could read every thought tumbling through her anxious mind. "Would you join me for a coffee?" he asked simply. The entire office gasped in unison. It was as though the building itself had tilted sideways. Clarkson's jaw dropped. Margaret's pen slipped from her fingers. No one said no to Alexander Sterling, but no one had ever heard of him personally inviting a brand new assistant for coffee either. Emma's throat went dry. Yes, of course." "Good," he said with a faint smile, as if amused by her panic. "I'll be waiting downstairs," and with that, he turned and strode away, leaving a stunned silence behind him. Emma sat back down, trembling, while the whispers returned, this time louder, sharper, and filled with envy. She's doomed. Or maybe promoted. Why her? What's so special about her? Emma wanted to crawl under her desk and stay there forever. Instead, she took a deep breath, grabbed her notebook, and followed him. Down in the cafe on the first floor, the noise of the office was replaced with the soft hum of espresso machines and the clinking of cups. Alexander sat at a corner table, alone, a coffee already in front of him. He looked up as she approached, and for the first time, his expression softened, as though he had dropped the invisible armor he wore upstairs. "Please sit," he said. Emma obeyed, clutching her notebook as though it could shield her. "I owe you an apology," she blurted before he could speak. "Yesterday, I didn't realize who you were. I was rude. I shouldn't have yelled. I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling." For a moment, silence stretched. Then he chuckled, a low, warm sound that surprised her. "Miss Carter, I found it refreshing," he said. "Do you know how many people in this company are afraid to even look me in the eye, let alone order me to do something? You treated me like a human being. That's rare." Emma blinked, caught off guard. I didn't mean to. I was just desperate. Everyone was panicking and I thought you were it." "Exactly," he interrupted gently. "You saw a problem and demanded a solution. No hesitation, no bowing, no flattery. That honesty is something I don't often encounter." His gaze held hers, steady and intent. She shifted in her seat, heat creeping up her neck. Thank you, I guess," she murmured. "But I'm sure the others think I embarrass myself." "They might," he said with a faint smirk. "But what matters is what I think. And I think you have, is potential." Emma's heart stumbled. Potential? She was just an assistant. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his phone buzzed and he glanced at it briefly before setting it aside. "I'd like to hear your thoughts sometime," he said. "Fresh perspectives are valuable. Don't let the whispers of the office convince you otherwise." And with that, he stood, offered her a brief nod, and left as smoothly as he had entered. Emma sat frozen, her coffee untouched, her notebook unopened. She had no idea what game she had just been pulled into, but one thing was certain: nothing in her life at Sterling Enterprises would ever be simple again. Clash of worlds. The following week at Sterling Enterprises unfolded like a surreal dream for Emma Carter. After that unexpected coffee with Alexander Sterling, she found herself constantly aware of eyes on her, whispering voices following her whenever she moved through the office. She could feel the curiosity, the envy, and sometimes even outright hostility. To her colleagues, she was no longer just the quiet new assistant. They saw her as the young woman whom the notoriously private CEO had singled out for attention. The speculation grew daily, and with each rumor, Emma felt her stomach knot tighter. She had not asked for this attention and certainly did not feel she deserved it. All she wanted was to do her job well, keep her head down, and prove that she belonged at Sterling. But Alexander's shadow now followed her everywhere, and she didn't know how to escape it. Mr. Clarkson was particularly short with her after that day. It was clear that he resented the fact that Alexander had bypassed him to speak to Emma directly. Clarkson, who prided himself on being the gatekeeper to upper management, now treated Emma with a mix of irritation and suspicion, as if waiting for her to slip up so he could cast her out. Emma worked twice as hard, arriving early, staying late, ensuring every task was done flawlessly. Still, Clarkson found reasons to criticize. Her reports were too detailed, her phone manner too casual, her desk too cluttered. She endured it quietly, hoping that diligence would silence his disdain. But even Clarkson could not control what happened next. It was a Thursday afternoon when Alexander appeared again on their floor. He was not escorted by aides or surrounded by security, but he didn't need them. His very presence commanded attention. Conversations hushed, keyboards stilled, and people straightened in their chairs as he walked by. Emma kept her eyes on her screen, praying he would not approach her desk again, but her prayers went unanswered. "Miss Carter," his voice came, smooth yet unyielding. "Walk with me." Emma's heart leapt into her throat. Clarkson's glare burned into the side of her face, but she had no choice. She rose quickly and followed Alexander, ignoring the prickle of dozens of eyes watching her. They entered the glass-walled conference room at the end of the corridor, and when the door closed, the silence felt both intimidating and strangely intimate. "I want your opinion," Alexander said without preamble. Emma blinked, caught off guard. My opinion, sir? Yes. You're not burdened by years of corporate conditioning. You're new, you're honest, you see things with fresh eyes. Tell me, what do you think of Sterling Enterprises? What do you see when you look around this company? Her mouth went dry. She wanted to give the safe answer, the polished line that would please him and protect her job. But his gaze was unwavering, piercing, as if daring her to tell him the truth. And Emma, though anxious, had never been one to sugarcoat her thoughts. I see a company that runs on fear, she said softly, surprising even herself. His eyebrows rose slightly. Go on. Emma clasped her hands together, forcing herself to steady her voice. I've only been here a few days, but it's obvious. People rush, not because they're inspired, but because they're terrified. They whisper about bosses behind their backs. They hide mistakes instead of admitting them. Everyone is so focused on not getting fired that they've forgotten what it means to actually contribute. And yesterday, when the system went down, it wasn't just a technical failure, it was a human one. No one trusted each other, no one collaborated. It was every man for himself. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. She regretted them immediately, her cheeks flushing with heat. What had she done? She had just insulted his company, his empire, to his face. Surely, this was the end of her brief career at Sterling. But Alexander did not explode. He did not scowl or raise his voice. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin, and studied her with an expression that was difficult to read. There was no anger. If anything, there was a spark of something else. Amusement, admiration. You speak boldly, he finally said. Emma's voice trembled. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. You weren't, he interrupted. You were honest. Do you know how rare that is here? Everyone tells me what they think I want to hear, but you... He paused, his lips curving faintly. You tell me what I need to hear, and you're right. Fear has kept this company disciplined, but it has also kept it stagnant. Emma exhaled shakily, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had braced herself for dismissal, but instead he seemed almost grateful. Sir, I don't pretend to know how to run a company, she said carefully. I just know what I see, and what I see are people who are drowning in silence. Maybe if leadership listened more, if they encouraged people to speak openly, maybe things would feel different. For a long moment Alexander was silent, his gaze fixed on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. Then he stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the conference table. Miss Carter, he said, his tone suddenly lighter, you may have more to teach this company than you realize. She stared at him, stunned. I'll expect your continued candor, he added. Don't lose it. And with that, he left the room, leaving Emma both shaken and exhilarated. That evening, as she packed her things at her desk, the office still buzzing with gossip about her private meeting with the CEO, Emma felt the weight of her two worlds pressing against each other. On one side was her reality, humble beginnings, a paycheck that barely covered rent, a mother who still worked overtime to pay bills, and a life that had always demanded humility. On the other side was this towering man, Alexander Sterling, who lived in penthouses, dined with governors, and wielded power she couldn't even comprehend. And yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, he had chosen to listen to her. It terrified her. It thrilled her. And most of all, it made her wonder, why her? Why, out of all the people in this massive company, was Alexander Sterling paying attention to Emma Carter? She didn't know that her honest words had already begun to unsettle something deep within him, something he had buried beneath years of business wars and boardroom battles. She didn't know that their worlds, so vastly different, were on a collision course that neither of them could escape. What she did know was that her life was no longer ordinary, and that each step she took forward carried her deeper into a world she had never imagined being part of. The competitor's move. The following weeks transformed Emma Carter's life in ways she had never anticipated. What had begun as a desperate scramble on her first day to survive the chaos of a computer meltdown had evolved into something stranger, deeper, and far more unnerving. Alexander Sterling, The man she had mistaken for IT support, the man whose empire sprawled across continents, had not only noticed her but continued to seek her out. He did not speak to her every day, nor did he summon her into constant meetings, but when he did, it was always with that same piercing attentiveness. He asked questions no one else dared to ask. He requested her unfiltered perspective, even when she hesitated, and every time she spoke, he listened, really listened. Emma tried to keep her focus on her role, juggling Clarkson's impossible demands, Margaret's passive-aggressive remarks, and the endless tide of emails and schedules. Yet beneath the surface of her routine, she sensed that something larger was shifting. Sterling Enterprises was not as untouchable as it appeared from the outside. The polished veneer of success masked cracks that were beginning to widen. Departments clashed over budgets, projects stalled under the weight of bureaucracy, and whispers circulated that key clients were wavering in their loyalty. And in every hushed conversation she overheard, one name emerged like a dark shadow: Vincent Black. Vincent Black was a rival in every sense of the word. If Alexander was known for precision, restraint, and quiet but decisive leadership, Vincent was his opposite: flamboyant, ruthless, and unapologetically hungry for power. Black Industries had grown rapidly in the past 5 years, swallowing smaller firms and poaching talent with promises of wealth and freedom from Sterling's rigid hierarchy. The financial press delighted in painting him as Sterling's nemesis, a brash upstart challenging the legacy of a family empire. Emma had only seen his face on magazine covers and in news clips, but his reputation was enough to chill her. He was the kind of man who smiled as he destroyed competitors, the kind who never played by rules unless they benefited him. It was late one evening when Emma stumbled into the heart of his latest scheme. She had stayed behind after hours, determined to finish Clarkson's endless paperwork. The office was quiet, its usual bustle replaced by the low hum of air conditioning and the glow of city lights spilling through the windows. She had just risen to stretch her legs when he noticed a light on in the smaller conference room down the hall. Curious, she moved closer, thinking perhaps Clarkson had left something behind. But as she neared the glass wall, she froze. Inside sat two men she didn't recognize, both in sharp suits, speaking in low voices. One of them was tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and a smirk that carried a sense of menace even through the glass. She realized with a jolt that she had seen that face before: Vincent Black himself. Emma's pulse quickened. She knew she shouldn't be here, shouldn't linger, but the conversation carried through the slightly open door, each word tightening the knot in her stomach. "Sterling won't see it coming," one of the men said. Vincent chuckled softly, a sound that made Emma's skin crawl. "Of course he won't. He's too busy playing saint to notice the knives at his back. Once the Tokyo account slips, the rest will follow. His empire will bleed out before he even realizes what's happening." Emma's breath caught. Tokyo account. She had seen that name on Clarkson's files earlier that week. It was one of Sterling Enterprises' largest international contracts. If they lost it, the ripple effect could be catastrophic. "What about internal leaks?" the other man asked. "They're already in place," Vincent replied smoothly. "A whisper here, a delay there. It doesn't take much to topple a house of cards when everyone inside is too afraid to admit the wind is blowing. Sterling's people are too loyal to him personally, too afraid to disappoint him. That kind of culture breeds silence, and silence breeds weakness. By the time he realizes, I'll have his crown." Emma's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give her away. She stumbled back quietly, her mind racing. This wasn't just competition. This was sabotage, orchestrated carefully to dismantle Sterling's empire from the inside. She hurried back to her desk, gathering her things with trembling hands, her only thought being that she had to tell someone. But who could she trust? Clarkson would dismiss her, or worse, twist her words into incompetence. Margaret would revel in spreading gossip but never risk herself by acting. The only person who might believe her, the only person who mattered, was Alexander himself. That night, Emma barely slept. She lay awake in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, torn between fear and duty. What if she was wrong? What if she had misunderstood the conversation? But the memory of Vincent's smirk, his cold certainty, would not leave her. She knew what she had heard, and she knew it could not be ignored. The next morning she resolved to act. She waited until the floor was quieter, until Clarkson was occupied in a meeting, before she slipped a note to Alexander's assistant on the executive level. She didn't dare write too much, only that she had urgent information to share and that it concerned the Tokyo account. Hours passed before she was summoned upstairs. She walked into Alexander's office with her hands clenched tight, her heart pounding. His office was nothing like the open floors below. It was spacious, lined with glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline like a throne room. He sat behind his desk, a man at ease and power, yet when he looked up at her, his expression softened. "Miss Carter," he said, "you asked for this meeting?" Emma swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. And I know I'm out of place speaking of things beyond my role, but last night I overheard something. Vincent Black was here, in our building, in one of the conference rooms." His eyes sharpened instantly. "Go on." She took a breath and recounted everything she had heard, the talk of the Tokyo account, the mention of internal leaks, the calculated plan to weaken Sterling Enterprises. She expected him to doubt her, to dismiss her as a nervous newcomer, but Alexander remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on her as though absorbing every word. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Then slowly he rose from his chair and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. For a moment he looked less like a businessman and more like a general surveying a battlefield. "You understand what you've done by telling me this?" he asked quietly. Emma's voice trembled. "I just thought you should know. If I'm wrong, then I'm sorry. But if I'm right," he turned, his gaze fierce now, "if you're right, then you may have just saved this company." Emma's breath caught. She had not expected gratitude, much less such intensity. "Miss Carter," Alexander continued, his voice low, "Vincent Black is dangerous. He doesn't forgive interference. If he realizes you overheard him, you will not be safe." The words chilled her. She hadn't considered the personal risk, only the moral weight of what she had witnessed. But Alexander's eyes softened again as he stepped closer. "You did the right thing, and I will protect you." Her heart pounded. In that moment, the lines between CEO and assistant, billionaire and newcomer, blurred into something far more human. For the first time, Emma saw not just the powerful man at the helm of an empire, but someone who valued loyalty, honesty, and courage. And though fear twisted inside her, so did something else, a spark she could not yet name, but which she knew would only grow. What Emma could not know was that Vincent Black had already marked her, and the storm he was about to unleash would test not only her strength but also the fragile, dangerous connection that was beginning to form between her and Alexander Sterling. The breaking point. For the next several days, Emma Carter lived in a state of quiet dread. The moment she had chosen to tell Alexander about Vincent Black's plot had changed everything. She could feel it in the way the atmosphere around her shifted, as though invisible eyes were watching her every move. At first she thought it was her imagination, but then the whispers began to sharpen, cutting deeper than idle gossip ever had before. Colleagues who once nodded politely in the hall now gave her sideways glances. Conversations that fell silent when she entered the break room resumed in hushed tones the second she left. Papers were misplaced from her desk. Emails she was certain she had sent mysteriously failed to reach their recipients. It was subtle at first, but the weight of it grew heavier with each passing day until the office, once simply intimidating, began to feel hostile. It didn't take long before she understood what was happening. Vincent Black had influence everywhere, even inside Sterling Enterprises. The internal leaks he had spoken of were not just numbers or files, they were people. And those people had figured out that she, Emma Carter, had stumbled across something she was never meant to hear. Now, instead of focusing on her job, she was fighting against a tide of sabotage and suspicion designed to break her spirit and push her out. The cruelest blows came not from strangers but from those who worked closest to her. Margaret Steele, who had always carried herself with superiority, began making pointed comments within earshot of others. "Some of us got our jobs by experience," she would say with a thin smile, "and others, well, they had coffee with the right man at the right time." Laughter followed her words, quiet but poisonous. Clarkson, too, grew more ruthless, snapping at Emma for mistakes that weren't hers, demanding impossible deadlines, and sighing theatrically whenever she delivered work, as though her very existence were a nuisance. The rumors spread like fire in dry grass. Emma heard them whispered in hallways, caught them in the sharp giggles of receptionists, saw them in the raised eyebrows of men who looked her up and down before turning away with knowing smirks. She's sleeping her way up. She thinks she's special because the boss likes her. She's probably just a pretty face he'll get tired of. Emma wanted to scream that none of it was true, that her relationship with Alexander was nothing more than honesty and respect, but she knew that in places like this, denial only fed the flames. At night, in her small apartment, she cried quietly into her pillow, torn between shame and anger. She had fought so hard to get here, to prove herself worthy, and now everything she did seemed tainted in the eyes of her colleagues. Yet still, she could not bring herself to regret what she had done. She had chosen truth over silence, and though it cost her, she could not undo it. But the loneliness gnawed at her, and she began to wonder whether she belonged here at all. One Friday morning, everything came to a head. Clarkson had called an emergency staff meeting, summoning half the floor into the main conference room. Emma sat at the edge of the long table, clutching her notebook, her stomach tight with unease. Clarkson paced at the head, his expression grave, while Margaret sat smugly beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clarkson began, "we have received troubling reports of misconduct. Certain individuals appear to be overstepping their roles, inserting themselves into matters far beyond their pay grade, and creating unfortunate impressions of favoritism." His eyes swept the table before landing squarely on Emma. Her face went hot, her throat dry. She wanted to sink into the floor, but Clarkson pressed out. "And this company thrives on order and respect for hierarchy. When that respect is undermined, chaos follows. I will not tolerate assistants who think themselves executives, nor will I allow baseless meddling that endangers our reputation." Murmurs rippled through the room, and Emma felt the weight of every stare pinning her in place. Margaret leaned forward with feigned concern. "Perhaps some employees simply don't realize the boundaries, Mr. Clarkson. Maybe they've confused professional attention for something more personal." A low wave of laughter rolled around the table, and Emma's chest clenched as tears threatened. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to insist that nothing inappropriate had ever happened, when the door to the conference room swung open. Silence fell instantly as Alexander Sterling himself stepped inside. His presence was like a storm breaking, a sudden shift in the air that commanded absolute attention. Clarkson froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color, while Margaret's smug smile faltered. Alexander walked to the head of the table, his gaze sweeping the room before settling firmly on Emma. For a heartbeat, she feared he had come to confirm their worst suspicions. But then he spoke, and his voice carried a clarity and strength that silenced every whisper. "I have heard enough," he said, his tone cool but cutting. "It has come to my attention that baseless rumors are being spread about Miss Carter. Let me be perfectly clear, she has done nothing wrong. On the contrary, she has proven herself to be one of the most loyal, insightful, and courageous people in this company." His words struck the room like thunder, leaving everyone wide-eyed and still. Clarkson stammered, "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect." Alexander's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Respect is exactly what is lacking here, Clarkson. You speak of hierarchy, yet you allow your floor to descend into gossip and pettiness. Do you believe that is the culture I built this company on?" Clarkson wilted under his stare, mumbling something inaudible. Alexander turned back to the room. "Miss Carter has my trust. She has earned it by telling me the truth when others were too afraid. If any of you cannot respect her, then you do not belong here." The room was so quiet that Emma could hear the hum of the air conditioner. She sat frozen, tears stinging her eyes, not from shame now, but from an overwhelming mix of relief and disbelief. Alexander had not only defended her privately, but had stood before the very people who had tried to destroy her and declared his faith in her character. "Meeting adjourned," Alexander said firmly, and without another glance at Clarkson or Margaret, he walked out, his steps steady, his authority unquestioned. Emma gathered her things slowly, her hands trembling. She could feel the weight of shocked stares around her, but for once, she did not care. Alexander's words had pierced through the lies and given her something no rumor could take away, dignity. Yet even as gratitude filled her, so did doubt. Because while Alexander's defense had shielded her from humiliation, it had also drawn a line in the sand. From now on, everyone would see her not just as Emma Carter, the assistant, but as the woman the CEO had chosen to protect, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to bear the cost of that choice. That night, as she sat by her window overlooking the city, Emma realized she stood at a breaking point. She could walk away, free herself from the whispers and the scrutiny, return to a simpler life where no one cared who she spoke to or what she knew. Or she could stay, hold her ground, and face the storm that was only growing darker on the horizon. For in the shadows of the skyline, Vincent Black was already plotting his next move, and Emma's decision would determine not only her own future but the fate of everything Alexander Sterling had built. Heart versus power. In the days that followed Alexander's public defense of her, Emma Carter found herself walking through Sterling Enterprises with a strange new duality pressing against her chest. On one hand, she felt vindicated, even honored, by the way the most powerful man in the building had silenced her critics and spoken of her loyalty with unshakable conviction. For the first time since her arrival, she did not feel like an imposter. She felt seen. Yet on the other hand, the weight of his words had painted an invisible target on her back. The whispers had not stopped. If anything, they had intensified. Those who once mocked her behind her back now eyed her with envy or resentment, their silence sharper than insults had ever been. She had moved unwillingly into a spotlight she never sought, and the glare of that light burned hotter with each passing day. Alexander, for his part, seemed almost oblivious to the stir his actions had caused among the staff, or perhaps he simply didn't care. After the meeting, he began calling on Emma more often, not for menial tasks, but for private conversations, discussions that left her unsettled in ways she could not explain. Sometimes they talked about the company, strategies, clients, the problems no one else dared to voice. But other times their conversations wandered into unexpected places. Books they had read, music they remembered from childhood, the way the city skyline looked just before dawn. He listened to her with the same attentiveness he reserved for high-stakes negotiations, and Emma found herself torn between awe and unease. It was during one such conversation, late in the evening in his office, when Alexander finally peeled back the mask that had fascinated her since the day she met him. The city glittered behind him through the vast glass wall, a tapestry of lights against the dark sky. He stood near the wind. Ow! His shoulders squared, but his tone quieter than usual. "Do you know why I walked into that server room myself, Miss Carter?" he asked suddenly. Emma shook her head, surprised. "I assumed it was because it wasn't responding quickly enough." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's the answer most people would accept. But it isn't the truth. The truth is, I wanted to see how people reacted when things fell apart. Chaos reveals more about character than calm ever does. And I was right. I saw panic. I saw silence. I saw fear. But I also saw one woman, new and untested, stand up and demand a solution." His eyes turned to her, steady and unflinching. "You think I defended you out of charity. You think I singled you out by accident. But I didn't. I see something in you that this company has forgotten. Courage, without calculation." Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to protest, to tell him that she wasn't nearly as brave as he believed, but his gaze pinned her in place. "I wasn't always this man, you see," he continued. His voice grew lower, tinged with something she had never heard in him before: vulnerability. "When my father died, I inherited this empire overnight. I was 27, young, arrogant, determined to prove myself. Everyone expected me to fail. They smiled to my face and sharpened knives behind my back. I learned quickly that trust is a luxury in this world, and humility is the armor that hides power until the moment you decide to wield it. That's why I walk the floors without announcement. That's why I fix servers and listen to whispers. People reveal themselves when they think you are no one. strode through chaos unbothered, but the man beneath it, shaped by betrayal, loneliness, and the relentless demand to be stronger than anyone expected. Her heart ached, though she could not say why. Perhaps because beneath their vastly different worlds, she recognized the same hunger in him that had driven her all her life, the hunger to prove that she was enough. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed sharply on the desk. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. He picked it up, scrolled, and then handed it to her silently. Emma's stomach dropped as she read the headline flashing across the news site. Sterling CEO linked to scandal, young assistant at the center of alleged affair. Her blood ran cold. The article was vicious, filled with grainy photos of her leaving the building, distorted quotes taken out of context, and the ugliest insinuations imaginable. It painted her as a manipulator who had seduced her way into Alexander's trust, and him as a man distracted by personal entanglements while his empire crumbled. Emma dropped the phone as though it had burned her skin. This isn't true, she gasped. How can they? It's Vincent, Alexander said grimly, his jaw tight. This is his move. He can't touch me directly, so he strikes at you. He knows I will not ignore an attack on someone under my protection. Emma's eyes stung with tears. But people will believe it. They already whisper. This will make it real to them. My reputation, everything. I'll be ruined. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. Listen to me. You are not ruined. Do you understand? This is noise, carefully crafted to wound us both, but I will not let him win. Emma shook her head, panic clawing at her chest. You don't understand, Mr. Sterling. I don't have your power. I don't have wealth or lawyers or influence. If people believe this, I'll be nothing but this. It's a scandal, a mistake. I'll lose everything I've worked for. For a moment, the mask of the CEO slipped entirely, and Alexander's hand hovered as though he wanted to take hers but stopped just short. His voice softened, carrying a rare tenderness. Emma, you are more than a headline, more than their lies. You are the reason this company may still stand tomorrow. You saw what others ignored. You spoke when others stayed silent. Vincent knows that. That's why he wants to break you. And that's why you cannot let him. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded faintly, though doubt still pressed heavily on her heart. That night, Emma left the building not as an assistant merely struggling to keep her job, but as a woman thrust into a battle far larger than herself. She walked through the city streets with her shoulders hunched, her mind spinning with images of her mother seeing the article, her friends back home whispering, her name smeared in ways she could never fully erase. The cost of honesty had always been high, but now it threatened to destroy her completely. Back in his office, Alexander stood alone by the window, watching her disappear into the night. His jaw tightened, his chest heavy. For years, he had fought competitors, governments, and markets. But this was different. This was personal. Vincent Black had crossed a line. And Alexander Sterling, who had built an empire brick by brick, would not allow the one woman who reminded him of truth and courage to be shattered by a man who thrived on lies, redemption, and revelation. Emma Carter vanished the morning after the scandal broke. She didn't come into the office, didn't answer her phone, didn't respond to messages. Her desk sat empty, a glaring reminder of how quickly the tides could turn in a world that fed on rumor and devoured the innocent. For hours, the building buzzed with speculation, some smug, some sympathetic, but all wrapped in the same poisonous curiosity. Margaret whispered to anyone who would listen that she had predicted this from the beginning, while Clarkson strutted about with false dignity, insisting that such distractions had no place in serious business. But beneath the gossip and posturing, an unease settled across Sterling Enterprises, because the article hadn't only smeared Emma. It had also thrown mud at Alexander himself, and everyone knew that Vincent Black was somewhere behind it, pulling strings in the shadows with his usual ruthlessness. Alexander, however, was not in the mood for speculation. He had cleared his schedule, shut his office doors, and unleashed his legal and investigative teams like hounds on a scent. For years, he had weathered storms with the cool detachment of a man who knew how to turn chaos into opportunity. But this time, he was different. This time it was not only his company's reputation at stake, it was Emma. And Alexander Sterling would not, allow her to be destroyed. He thought of the look in her eyes when she had seen the headlines: panic, shame, despair. A young woman who had clawed her way up from obscurity, who had fought every step to prove she belonged, now brought to her knees by lies she had never invited. It ignited something in him that he had long buried, something stronger than ambition or pride. For once he was not fighting for profit or dominance. He was fighting for her. While his lawyers prepared defamation suits, Alexander P.E. personally directed a quiet investigation. Every contact, every source, every thread of the article was traced back to its origin. Within days, the truth surfaced. Payments had been funneled from black industries through shell corporations to a tabloid notorious for bending facts. Anonymous quotes had come from sources within Sterling, which, upon closer inspection, turned out to be employees recently courted by Vincent Black with offers of double salaries. The smear campaign was not sloppy. It was deliberate, precise, and timed to coincide with the critical Tokyo account negotiations. Vincent's strategy was clear: discredit Alexander by tying him to scandal, weaken his assistant until she fled, and strike at Sterling Enterprises while the leadership reeled. But Vincent had underestimated two things: Emma's courage and Alexander's resolve. When Alexander finally tracked Emma down, she was sitting alone on a park bench at the edge of the city, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her face pale and drawn from exhaustion. She hadn't eaten in a day, hadn't slept in two. She looked up in shock when he appeared before her, dressed in his usual immaculate suit, but with a weariness in his eyes she had never seen before. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please, you shouldn't be here. They're saying such awful things. It's my fault. I've dragged you down with me." He sat beside her without hesitation, the cold wind tugging at his coat. "Emma, look at me." His voice was firm, steady, cutting through her panic like steel through glass. She turned reluctantly, tears shimmering in her eyes. "This is not your fault," he said, his tone fierce with conviction. "Vincent Black is behind this. I have proof. He paid for every lie they printed. He wanted you gone because you stood in his way, and he wanted me distracted because I was finally close to outmaneuvering him. He thinks we are pawns he can move off the board. But he miscalculated." Emma shook her head, her voice trembling. "Even if that's true, the damage is done. People will never see me the same. My name is ruined, and yours is too." For a long moment, he was silent, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart pound. Then softly, he spoke words she had never expected to hear. "Emma, I don't care about their whispers. I don't care about their lies. What I care about is you." Her breath caught and her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes, you," he said, his voice low but steady as though he had rehearsed it 1,000 times in his mind. "From the moment you ordered me to fix that server, when everyone else panicked, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty without fear. You reminded me of who I wanted to be when I started this journey. Before the power, before the battles. You are not a scandal, Emma. You are the only truth in a world built on facades, and I will not let you disappear." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as his words sank in. For so long she had seen herself as small, ordinary, replaceable. Yet here was Alexander Sterling, a man who commanded empires, telling her that she mattered, not as a pawn, not as a distraction, but as the center of his truth. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an alert. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "It's time," he said. "Come with me." Emma hesitated, but his hand brushed hers, firm yet gentle, and she felt a surge of strength return. She followed him back into the heart of the city, into the very storm that had tried to destroy her. That afternoon, in a press conference broadcast live, Alexander stood before cameras with Emma at his side. The world watched as he laid bare the evidence: financial trails, emails, testimony from insiders who confessed to Vincent Black's manipulation. With calm precision, he dismantled the smear campaign piece by piece until nothing remained but the truth. This company was attacked not through markets or contracts, Alexander declared, his voice carrying like thunder, but through lies aimed at silencing those who dare to speak the truth. Miss Carter stood against fear and told me what no one else would. And for that courage, she was targeted. But let it be known, she has my trust, my loyalty, and my protection. And anyone who believes they can break her will have to go through me. The room erupted with questions, but the damage was already undone. Headlines that once smeared Emma now blazed with scandal against Vincent Black. Within days, regulators opened investigations into his business practices, and contracts he had stolen began to crumble under scrutiny. For all his bluster, Vincent had lost the one battle he had never prepared for, facing an opponent who fought not only with power but with heart. In the weeks that followed, Sterling Enterprises did more than recover. It rose stronger. Clients who had wavered returned, impressed by Alexander's transparency and loyalty. Employees who once whispered now looked at Emma with something close to respect, their envy tempered by the undeniable truth of what she had endured and survived. And as for Emma and Alexander, their bond deepened in ways words could scarcely capture. They no longer needed to dance around the truth of what had grown between them. What began as a misunderstanding, a woman yelling at the IT guy, had transformed into something neither of them had expected, but both now embraced. One evening, long after the storm had passed, Alexander invited Emma to the rooftop of Sterling Tower. The city stretched below them, alive with light and possibility. He turned to her, his expression unguarded, and for the first time she saw not the CEO, not the billionaire, but simply the man. "Emma," he said quietly, "I once believed that power was everything, that winning meant never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. But then you walked into my world, and you proved me wrong. Winning isn't about empire, it's about finding someone worth fighting for." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy, not despair. She stepped closer, her hand sliding into his. "And I thought I was just an assistant trying not to sink," she whispered. "But you showed me that my voice mattered, that I mattered." The city lights shimmered around them as they stood together, their hearts finally unburdened, their truths entwined. For Emma Carter, the girl from a modest background who had once believed she was invisible, life had transformed into something extraordinary. And for Alexander Sterling, the billionaire who had spent years hidden behind armor, he had finally found the one person who reminded him of the simple, unshakable power of love. And as the night embraced them, the lesson was clear for all who would hear their story. True worth is not found in wealth or status, but in the courage to speak, the strength to endure, and the grace to stand beside someone even when the world turns against you.